We are going to continue some of the conversation about crypto with Senator Lummis, Senator Cynthia Lummis. Please welcome Senator Cynthia Lummis, and we are delighted to welcome her back to FMQ. She has spoken at FMQ before. And we are also delighted to welcome back Emily Wilkins from CNBC, who is going to moderate this conversation. Okay. Emily.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, Rena, and thank you for Georgetown University for really having us today. This is always a fantastic event that I look forward to, and Senator, I'm particularly excited about our conversation today. I just want to sort of jump right in because you've been sort of one of the leaders in Congress when it comes to crypto. And I want you to kind of give us the lay of the land right now. I know we do not have much time left of this legislative session. Are you expecting anything more to get done this year?
Yes, I do think we're going to get something done during the lame duck. And I'm an optimist. The glass is always half full with me. It's never half empty, which is why I say I really do think we're going to get something done during the lame duck. There is a bill in the Senate Ag Committee that defines the jurisdiction of digital assets within the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Because Bitcoin is clearly a commodity. Ethereum is a commodity now that the SEC has spoken on that as to exchange-traded funds. And there are probably other digital assets that will turn out to be under the jurisdiction of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. So the Senate Ag Committee has teed up a bill that helps set the scope for Commodity Futures Trading Commission regulation of digital assets that are commodities. So if that bill comes out of the Senate Ag Committee during the lame duck, then it will get what we call Christmas treed with other additional amendments, bills amended onto it to create a bigger financial services type of bill. Things that might get amended onto it include defining what is a security and what is a commodity for purposes of SEC jurisdiction versus commodity jurisdiction. The Safer Banking Act, which is something that Senator Schumer has been working on very hard.
And that's the one with dealing with marijuana banking, kind of allowing banks to, or marijuana companies to be able to access some of those banking services.
Correct, and it's not limited to marijuana, which is why I support it. My state of Wyoming has neither medical nor recreational marijuana. And so the reason I'm interested in the Safer Banking Act is because of what we do produce: oil, gas, and coal. And these are things that are also getting jettisoned from banks holding too many hydrocarbon companies on their assets. They too would receive some protection from the risk components associated with bank examinations under the Safer Banking Act. So same ultimate goal, just a different banked asset in mind in terms of Senator Schumer's and my interest in that bill. And so we end up, hopefully, with the SEC component of jurisdiction over digital assets as it's laid out in the Lummis-Gillibrand bill, or sort of a combination of FIT 21, which passed the House earlier this year, and Lummis-Gillibrand. So we have a complete set of jurisdiction over digital assets, the SEC side and the CFTC side, and safer banking and perhaps a few other things.
All right, so lots of hope here for the lame duck session in November and December post-election. If I can ask, though, quickly, because the bill that you mentioned, the one for the CFTC, the one that's in the Agriculture Committee, it's Senator Debbie Stabenow who's been leading this bill. We know she's been working a bit with Senator Boozman on it, but the latest that we really have from Capitol Hill is that Boozman doesn't think it's ready. It doesn't seem like that bill has a lot of Republican support at this point, certainly not enough that it would need to pass on the floor. Have you been speaking with Senator Stabenow, and where do things stand with you and your Republican colleagues being able to get behind that bill this calendar year, especially when there's a really good chance that Republicans will run the Senate next year and you can just wait a couple months and have a better environment?
I think there are minor tweaks that can be made to the Senate Ag Committee bill that could mean that it gets out of committee this year. So I don't really want to wait because there's going to be so much to do early on in 2025 that I worry that we'll not get to it again until late in 2025. And we just can't wait anymore. Europe is way ahead of us. 20% of Americans now hold digital assets. It's a $2 trillion business. Europe is ahead of us. They passed their regulatory framework in early 2023. So they are now embedding their regulatory framework. They're recruiting American companies to relocate to Europe. At the same time, the SEC is suing a lot of digital asset companies using enforcement actions of rules and regulations that are not clearly defined nor explained to the industry. And it's running up legal fees for that industry when they could easily just go over to Europe and set up shop. So the United States puts itself at a strategic disadvantage with regard to financial services related to digital assets if we don't put a clear regulatory framework in statute. By deferring to the SEC on this, we have really stubbed our toes. The SEC's approach is just truly unclear. And the industry is perplexed about how to navigate a very unclear regulatory framework. Furthermore, the SEC seems pretty hostile towards a lot of digital asset companies, even those who desperately want to comply with an understood regulatory framework. And the SEC can be really effective if they'll get comfortable with digital assets. The SEC is good at disclosure and consumer protection. It is the disclosure components of their capabilities that makes them an important player in the world of digital assets. So to protect consumers via disclosure, I hope the SEC will straighten up and fly right and help this industry succeed instead of finding a myriad of ways to help it fail.
And I know you mentioned for the bill, you think it can get to bipartisan support with a couple tweaks. What are those tweaks? What are the things that you're not comfortable with right now as Senator Stabenow's bill stands? You know,
it's so close that, and I still want to make sure that they, meaning Stabenow and Boozman, have a chance to work out their issues. Then Gillibrand, who's on the Ag Committee, and I can weigh in with what we see as appropriate. Among the things that has been the big challenge is defining what is a commodity and what is a security for purposes of establishing jurisdiction. So what we propose, meaning Senator Gillibrand and I, is something called ancillary assets, which helps provide some guidance and sets up a entity that can help guide that determination in the event that it's really unclear. if a digital asset comes along that we don't know about today, that has elements or characteristics of a security but behaves more like a commodity, we want sort of an industry-driven level of expertise to help advise how that asset should be treated. So it is the ancillary assets component that I think is the most important to this bill. So Senator Gillibrand and I are trying to engage in that discussion. She from her vantage point on the committee, me from my vantage point on the banking committee. We can't get anything through the banking committee. So it's up to the Ag Committee. So we're trying to engage with really making the determination via ancillary assets about what is definitionally a security versus a commodity.
Sure. And going back to the Banking Committee, obviously currently chaired by Sherrod Brown, certainly he has said a number of things on crypto that the industry has not loved. But next year, there is a good chance that we could be seeing Chairman Tim Scott of the Banking Committee. And he's already talked, you and him appeared together, I believe, at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. He's talked a little bit about starting a digital asset subcommittee. And I think you are sort of one of the main folks in the running to chair said subcommittee. So talk to me a little bit. Let's say, hypothetically, it's next year, Republicans have won the Senate, you have this subcommittee gavel. What are your main priorities?
Well, we want to stage things over a short time frame, because if Republicans control the Senate, our opportunity to do so may only last 2 years, because this year the Senate map looks better for Republicans. In 2026 and 2028, the Senate map electorally looks better for Democrats. So we may only have control of the Senate for 2 years. So I'm putting together a plan that is executable over a 2-year period, and that makes sure that we have a clear regulatory framework for stablecoins, for digital assets, for NFTs that behave like a store of value or a means of exchange, how to integrate artificial intelligence in this. And of course, I proposed a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And I want to have an opportunity to explain why I think that's important to the United States status as the world reserve currency, and how a Bitcoin strategic reserve could help back and stabilize the US dollar at a time when we're $35 trillion in debt. Another thing that's kind of novel, but I think that we should do as a effort to shore up the US dollar as the world reserve currency, is to trademark the US dollar. There's no trademark or copyright protecting the term US dollar. In fact, we stole the term dollar from Spain, because it was the gold standard of government-issued currencies, fiat currencies, back when we became a country. We even stole the S with the 2 lines through it from Spain. And so it's high time that we protected that via copyright. And I know that sounds minor, but it's just a way of placing a card on the table that says, we're going to protect the integrity and recognition of our currency as the world's reserve currency, and then follow it up by backing it up with a Bitcoin strategic reserve.
I did want to ask a little bit about that Bitcoin strategic reserve. It's an idea certainly that you've put forward, that former and possibly future President Donald Trump has given his stamp of endorsement. And I believe it would involve buying, I believe, 1 million shares of Bitcoin and then holding that for 20 years. Mm-hmm. I know one of the criticisms I've heard of this particular plan is that Bitcoin can vary so much in cost that there would be some concern about how much value that would be, sort of just the monetary background to it. Can you explain a little bit more about how that policy will work, and if you think that if it has enough support to actually get through Congress?
Here's how it works. The United States government already holds over 200,000 Bitcoin. So number one, we need to encourage the United States to quit selling their Bitcoin, most of which was retained through the asset forfeiture program, Silk Road stuff. Then we need to establish a program where converting current assets into Bitcoin, we begin purchasing and purchase 1 million Bitcoin over 4 years. Now, how we do that is not by borrowing more money. We do it by taking the gold certificates, not the hard gold, but the gold certificates that we already hold. We hold them on the books of the United States at an artificially low value. We hold them at a value that they were in the 1970s. So let's bring those gold certificates up to current market value. Then we take that market value, convert it to Bitcoin, hold it for 20 years. And in 20 years, 1 million Bitcoin will make a huge, that's like $17 trillion in 20 years. Based on the history of Bitcoin, starting from 2009 when it was created. So if you go back to the history of Bitcoin, 2009 to 2024, over that period of time, it's increased somewhere between 45 and 55% every year. So you project that out for a few years and then assume over time that it's going to drop from the 55% range down to 45, then 35, then 25. Then you get to a point where it's worth about 17 trillion in 20 years. Now, Robert F. Kennedy has proposed a 4 million Bitcoin strategic reserve. Under his plan, which is similar to mine in terms of the way it plays out, it would completely eliminate our debt in 20 years. Completely eliminate it. So these are plans to buy and hold Bitcoin and just let it appreciate in value. During the same time, it can undergird the US dollar in a way that helps us preserve our status as the world's reserve currency.
And are you concerned under that plan, just the variations that we've seen in Bitcoin? I mean, I know you touched a little bit sort of the expectations for what it is in the future, but it does seem like something that's been perhaps a little more volatile than, say, gold.
You know, if you look at, definitely more volatile than gold. Gold's been around a lot longer than Bitcoin. As more people adopt Bitcoin, as there are more nodes out there, as more people mine Bitcoin, Bitcoin becomes more solid, secure, validated, and immutable. So we know that as adoption grows, as nodes grow, as mining grows, every time it's mined and put on that Bitcoin blockchain, it becomes more immutable. It becomes more safe, more secure. And that's happening every day. So over time, its fluctuations are going to become less of a whipsaw and more of just a wave.
I know we've got Q&A in just a few minutes, but before we do, I did want to take a minute to ask you, Congress rarely gets anything done unless there is a deadline. You guys have a very interesting deadline at the end of 2025. The 2017 tax package is expiring.
Yeah.
Is there an opportunity to do some of the things you would like to see done with crypto or with financial markets as a part of that tax package?
Yes. I think we need to establish a de minimis amount of Bitcoin that can be used as a means of exchange without a capital gains tax effect. I think we need to rationalize the wash rule. I think there are several other aspects of integrating digital assets into the tax code. They're here to stay. Digital assets aren't going away. And so we need to figure out when digital assets interact with the US dollar, how do we treat them for tax purposes and other purposes. And you know, it's going to be a unique exercise, because we treat legal tender, another country's recognition of legal tender, differently under the tax code than we treat a commodity or security. Bitcoin is legal tender elsewhere in the world. It's not just a commodity for the US purposes, but it's legal tender in El Salvador. And so we need to now look at that and say, okay, now how do we treat specifically Bitcoin under our tax code, because it performs like legal tender in another country.
I'm wondering, Wyoming, your home state, is doing a lot right now with digital assets, including, I think, trying to become the first state to have their own token. Can you talk a little bit about what Wyoming is doing, specifically anything that you think, if it's successful in Wyoming, the federal government should consider adopting?
Yeah, well, we were very first, and have been before, in establishing mechanisms for commercial transactions. For example, the limited liability company was created in Wyoming. And most people don't realize that. Now it's ubiquitously used. So we established the first law to create a special purpose depository institution. We had the first bank examination manual for special purpose depository institutions. We established a sort of a commercial code for commercial and contracting based in digital assets, and a chancery court to go with it. So there's a special court to deal with and build case law as to digital assets. We created DAOs. Wyoming created an entity, a nonprofit entity that can house DAOs. So these are very innovative practices. Now, I'm actually admittedly, I'm a little squeamish about Wyoming having a token. I mean, it could behave like a stable coin. We have a sovereign wealth fund called the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund that is capable of serving as 100% liquid asset backup for a Wyoming-issued stablecoin. Stablecoins are a way for other digital assets to interact with the US dollar. So if Wyoming's token has attributes of a stablecoin, I think I could get comfortable with that. There's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of fraud in the crypto space, in digital assets. Most of that fraud is not the asset itself. It's the manner in which it's being marketed, sold, conveyed, and not well undergirded. But there are some assets that are creepy. And so...
can I ask you to give you an example of a creepy asset?
Well, assets that are not sufficiently backed by something that is a solid store of value. Assets that are issued with the issuer holding some back for themselves. I worry about those. Those are the ones I think we need more disclosure about. That's why I think that having an SEC regulatory component for those assets that behave like a security and having that kind of disclosure is important.
I think we have a couple questions from maybe some students in the audience. If anyone wants to come to one of the, I see 2 mics right here. Yes.
Hey, how's it going? Hi, Senator Lummis. My name is Adi. I'm a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service. My question for you is, in the early days of Congress, crypto was largely bipartisan. However, of late and since then, we are seeing more and more disagreements between the two parties. And my question to you is, what areas of crypto legislation as a whole are still bipartisan, and where can we find compromise? Thanks for the question. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York and I have
maintained a very bipartisan approach to digital asset regulation. Our bill is comprehensive. It covers commodities, securities, stablecoins, NFTs, and government-issued, like the digital yuan, making sure that when the government issues a digital currency, that it's not used as a means of surveillance. So those are central bank digital currencies. So we touch on all those things, and it's been bipartisan all along. So we've had great success together working in a bipartisan manner. Now there are certain players that, especially that are more members of the Democrat Party and the particularly progressive wing of the Democrat Party, that don't trust stores of value and means of exchange that are not created by government. And since these are not created by government, they're very standoffish. That's why we can't get anything out of the Senate Banking Committee. I think it's still bipartisan, and I think that showed in two instances this year. One was on a bipartisan basis, we passed through the House and the Senate a bill that got to the president's desk and he vetoed. And it was the one that created a Congressional Review Act effort to revise the Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 within the SEC. I know that sounds like it's down in the weeds, and truly it is. But
basically it would roll back some guidance that the SEC had put forward.
That's correct. So that passed on a bipartisan basis in both houses. Now, the House, on a bipartisan basis, passed FIT 21, which is a pretty comprehensive regulatory framework for digital assets. So the House has shown it can do it, and the Senate has shown it can do it too. So I think because we had those votes, and we saw that there is at least a sufficient appetite and understanding and readiness to address this, I think we can do it. And I think it's going to stay bipartisan. Now, I'll admit my party is a little more friendly to this asset class, but I think it's still going to stay bipartisan by and large.
Thank you so much for your question, for your answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator, so much. Unfortunately, we do have to leave it there because we're at time, and I believe we are at the last panel before lunch, so we don't want to stand between anyone and food. But Senator, thank you. Pardon?
We have one more.
Oh, hopefully you're not too hungry. You got one more.
I'll try to keep it brief. I tend to.
No, Senator, but I think we are out of time.
Oh, are we out?
But.
Oh, you have another speaker. Oh, awesome. Enjoy your next speaker. Thank you.
Senator Lummis, thank you again so much. Really appreciate it.